Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless. Today we're going to be recapping the big Timeless tournament from last weekend that I got a chance to play in. I recorded some of my games, but no gameplay this video. This video is just going to be a tournament recap and then talking about the meta. I'll make a separate video, probably post it tomorrow, with some of my matches that I went ahead and recorded. So at this tournament, we ended up getting top 8 and making playoffs, which is pretty awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and start by recapping my day and going over my deck. I brought Mardu Energy, which is very predictable, and it's pretty close to the stock brew that we had been using for a while, but there are a couple of tweaks that I made for the meta here specifically. The meta, in my opinion, lately has been heading a lot more towards unfair decks. There are a lot of decks that can quite literally turn one you, or at least do something busted like landing a Necropotence on turn one. So you are going to need a lot of ways to interact with these unfair decks and interact on turn one. Because of this, we're going to be main decking a lot more discard. In the energy deck, we actually have main deck Thoughtseize in this version, which is something that I was opposed to for a while. And we're bringing a lot more hate in the sideboard as well. Other than the main deck Thoughtseizes, I believe the main deck is more or less the same. I think we cut one Ragavan from the main deck for it, and we also cut another card that I can't quite remember off the top of my head. Maybe did we have Tokothonian Nightmares before? I can't quite remember. One other thing that I did adjust was the mana base. The deck leans a lot more into black as a primary color over red. Like the original energy lists were definitely red, white primary. Right now, this deck is a primary white deck that is splashing a lot of black, so we took some of the red, white lands and switched them out for black, white lands. So we have a black, white Surveil land now. I think we have an extra Godless Shrine as well. Just the mana is slightly skewed towards black just because those are the colors that we need to hit. And then the sideboard, we did change it up a bit. Like I said, we're up to 8 discard spells in the sideboard. Sideboard plus main deck, we have 2-2 split of Juggernaut, Peddler, and Thoughtseize, both in the main deck and the sideboard. Juggernaut Peddler is like overall a better main deck card, and it is better in like matchups where Thoughtseize isn't necessarily good, so it's a card I would like to main deck more. But like I said before, there's a lot of decks you really need to interact on turn one against, so that's why we're doing the 2-2 split to hedge a little bit. There are some decks that you really need your interaction to come down on turn one. As for the rest of the sideboard, we got 4 Deafening Silence. We're up to 4 copies of that. Like, this is sincerely a 4 Deafening Silence, 4 Peddler, 4 Thoughtseize meta. Deafening Silence is another way to interact on turn one. I really like the card in the current meta. It is great against pretty much every unfair deck that people are going to be playing. It is a way to stop the Show and Tell combo, though you don't have to play it on turn one against them. But against Dark Ritual decks, Belcher decks, Sacrifice decks, if you slam this, they cannot use their fast mana. So it's the best proactive white card that you can go ahead and play to proactively stop their combo. We have 2 Disruptor Flutes. This is a Pithing Needle equivalent, and the reason we do Flute over Needle, 2 reasons. First, best unfair deck right now is the Orzhov Scam Belcher deck. Well, actually, it's not the best necessarily. I think Show and Tell's a little better, but it's one of the best and is the best new one. So we have to be ready for that matchup. That deck can do 2 things that you would really want to be able to flute. You want to either be able to flute a Sorin or flute the Belcher, flute their win condition, or you could flute a Necro when they stick a Necro, if they do stick a Necro. So that's 3 different things, so you really can't like proactively blind Needle in that matchup, because if you Needle Sorin, they will just dig for a Belcher and move the Belcher. Same if you do it the other way around. So against that matchup, you're going to want to hold up the 2 mana and then reactively Disruptor Flute to name whatever card they actually do use, because that deck has to go all in order to get enough mana to actually play its cards. So you just need to screw them over once, and then you'll be able to kill them by turning your creatures sideways. Shouldn't be too crazy. Oh yeah, and Disruptor Flute also very good because it has more text against other unfair decks, such as Show and Tell. Yeah, you could sideboard this in against Show and Tell or any other combo deck. Just use it to tax their most important card. Like against Show and Tell, you could just name Show and Tell with this, and now their combo piece costs 6 mana. And it becomes very difficult for them to win the game until they remove that card. 2 copies of Swords of Plowshares. This is what's going to come in against creature decks. Notably, we're very light on sideboard cards for creature decks. It's really just bring out the Thoughtseizes and bring in Swords. So that's a downside to the current philosophy with building this deck right now, and we'll talk about Boros versus Mardu energy later after I recap my day, because there's 2 ways to build energy right now, right? You could build it the way I'm doing it, where you're bringing the Thoughtseizes and you're trying to beat the unfair matchups, or you can build it all in on the energy plan. You could play Flage, the One Ring, and you could beat up creature decks. You kind of have to choose. You can't really do both with these 75 cards that you get offered when you build your deck. And lastly, unlicensed fairs in the last two spots. So that's good against a lot of decks in the meta right now. It's good against the other good fair deck in the deck right in the meta right now, which is a blue black tempo. It's a great sideboard card against a bunch of unfair strategies that are going to be leveraging the graveyard. So I'm very happy to have hers in this deck. As for our actual day, we ended up playing like all real decks. Yeah, I have it over here. So we ended up playing all meta decks, which is pretty cool. We played Jetstorm in the first round. We ended up playing the mirror match twice in a row, and we went 4-0 in the mirror. So I think we're going to upload these two matches for the gameplay video. And we'll make a video about the mirror and how to win it. I'm going to record it like right after this. I have the gameplay recorded, but I got to, voice over it. Then we also went ahead and played Novos and beat Omnitel, which is pretty awesome. And our one loss was to Chest Hair. It was a really good game against him. We ended up losing 2-1. The gameplay is on his channel if you want to go ahead and watch it. His POV is going to be really interesting because it's a very skill-intensive matchup. And game 2 especially was a very, very, very long game. So this is Chest Hair's blue-black tempo, and this is the current build of it that he prefers. The current build is Esper, leveraging Swords to Plowshares right now, because Swords to Plowshares is just an S tier removal spell, and one of the best ways to interact with creature decks in the format, including my deck. It is also just a lot better than a card like Fatal Push when you're playing against any sort of deck that can reanimate, or a combo deck like Jetstorm that relies on the creatures dying instead of being exiled. He's also playing Deathrite Shaman lately over Nethergoyf, which is a cool take. Like, both cards are very strong, both Nethergoyf and Deathrite Shaman, though Deathrite Shaman has proved better lately. This is not my deck. I'm just kind of parroting whatever Chest Hair says and showing you this is his build. He went undefeated in the group stages 5-0 with us, and then went into the playoffs. Did not end up winning the tournament, though, but the deck still did really, really well. He's got a lot of the similar sideboard cards to me. Lots of Thought Seizes and Deafening Silences for those unfair matchups, though not as many because his deck is actually a counter spell deck that is able to play Spiral Pierces and Mana Drains in the main deck. All right, and then after that, we did make the playoffs, which is awesome. We made top 8 after going 4-1. And then we got matched up against our friend Tommy from Discord, Steel Curtain 21. He was playing Mono Blue Belcher. I don't know why the matchups aren't shown up here, but if we go back to the main one, this is what he was on, and Tommy ended up winning the whole tournament with Mono Blue Belcher, which is awesome. So this was the winning deck list here. This is what took us out. So the only two people we lost to was the winner and to Chest Hair, who's like the best blue-black player I know, right? So can't be mad about that tournament result. I think we did really well. So this was the winning deck, and this is quite a good deck. If you do want to go ahead and bring this to the Metagame Challenge this weekend, I think this is very good. I won't call this the best deck in the format, but it is a really good one. You can get a lot of wins. It won the tournament here, so you can take it to a 7-0 if you want. It is a bit of a tough matchup for energy, though we have a lot of tools to fight this. Unfortunately, when I was against Tommy, I think I kind of low rolled. I should watch the gameplay back again and see. But both our games are really short. Game 1, I don't have too much interaction for him. I kind of have to hope that I can mulligan to my interaction or kill him really fast. I did keep a hand that had one piece of interaction against him, but unfortunately one just wasn't enough to win game 1, so it was a quick loss there. And then in game 2, I think I mulliganed to either 5 or 6, and I kept a hand, and I interacted with him twice, but twice wasn't enough. So we ended up losing a very quick 2-0 against this deck. This is a deck that can play a lot of interaction like Mana Drain to stop your interaction with them, and it can also play Commandeer. Once they get their combo going, sometimes they can just hemorrhage card advantage, right? So it is totally possible for this deck to just commandeer something just to defend themselves. Like I thought, sees him turn 1, he commandeers it. Turn 2, I try to play something, but it gets mana drained, and then that mana drain mana turns into the One Ring, and the One Ring just draws a million cards, and then he's back in it, and just draws into Omnitel and wins the game. It is a strong deck that is capable of doing a lot of busted things, but Mardu does have the tools to fight back. Like, I do think Mardu would be slightly favored here in this matchup, just because of how much, discard we're bringing in. In fact, the current version I'm playing with main deck discard would probably win most of the time. but unfortunately we didn't have luck on our side for the tournament. And maybe I could have mulliganed more aggressively to find my hate pieces, but that's always a losing battle, right? Because if I mulligan really hard to find a hate piece, then I'm not going to be keeping an explosive start, and the Belcher player has more turns to draw out of the loss. And this deck's, it's also a little hard to hate out because it can both put a Belcher into play off of either mana drain acceleration or just off of show and tell, or just naturally by paying 4 mana and then another 3 and kill you with that. And it can also do the Omniscience Fave Wishes Go Grab Approach of the Second Sun thing. Alright, as for the other decks that comprise the meta, this tournament actually had like a really good meta representation. Just about every single meta deck was here and represented, which is awesome. And we also saw some brand new ones. And the fact that most of the other players are playing meta decks really brings a lot of credence to these new decks that I'll talk about next. All right, so 4 people brought energy to the tournament. And actually, we are looking at the top 4. Okay, so 4 people brought energy. 3 of them made the top 4 right here. JJ Galls and myself brought the exact same build of it. We're both playing the version that has 2 main deck Thoughtseizes, and the other 2 energy players over here are just playing like a copy paste of my slightly older version, where I have the sideboard guide for this deck. And we overall did very, very well. The one energy player who did not end up making the top 8 still went 2 and 3, and I think 2 of their losses, their 2 losses were from energy. So only lost to the mirror match. Energy overall did very well. It's still a great deck. Show and tell overall still did pretty good, but I think only one person brought traditional Omnitel control. There are some other show and tell decks such as Mono Blue Belcher, but when you think of show and tell, you do think of this build. This is by far and away the best build of show and tell right now, and I do recommend it. This is called Omnitel Control. You can build a turbo version of Omnitel that just focuses on putting the show and tell into play as quickly as possible. But this version gets to play mana drain. It usually plays discard, though I think Novos is not currently playing discard in his main deck. And I do like this version a lot better because you do get to interact with your opponent. Mana drain is also a busted card, and you can straight up mana drain into an Omniscience with this deck, which is great. Yeah, he's got the discard in his sideboard. I've seen a couple different iterations and versions of this deck. I've seen people play a lot more discard spells than just 2 in the sideboard. It's definitely a meta call for what you want to play. And this deck, it does have both win conditions. So I've seen versions of this deck that don't do the Mastermind's acquisition into Approach of the Second Sun win. But this version does. I think it is better to have access to that instant win because sometimes you really do need it. There are some versions that really, really, really lean on Hullbreaker Horror and try to use just this card to win the game. Because, this is a screwed up card here. But Timeless is a screwed up format, and you do really need to be able to win on the spot in some conditions. Let's see, as for other good ones, we should show off the playoff matches. That's what I wanted to do. Because for whatever reason, there's no clear bracket on this website, so we just go down here to see the playoff matches. So in the quarterfinals, and it also doesn't show the deck lists here for whatever reason, but whatever. Quarterfinals, we ended up having Chest Hair win on Esper Tempo. We ended up having Mono Blue Belcher win, Show and Tell won, and this really cool new Grixis deck that we got to talk about also ended up winning. Semifinals, we went ahead and had Blue Belcher go ahead and beat Esper Tempo, and then also Show and Tell went ahead and beat the new control deck. And then lastly, the Belcher version of Show and Tell beat the traditional control version of Show and Tell. As for really cool decks in the format, though, actually, no, let me keep talking about meta decks. I only talked about Energy and Show and Tell and forgot I wanted to talk about the rest. So we talked about Esper Tempo with Gesture, we talked about Mardu Energy, and then we just talked about Show and Tell. As for other known decks in the format, we did have one Beans player who did kind of mid. We had only one Jetstorm player in this particular tournament, and they just had a pretty mid performance, right? 1 and 3. Yeah, 1-3 drop. This is just sample size. I think Jetstorm is still a fine deck. Greaseball would have won 7-0 in the tournament, obviously. But what did surprise me is we only had one Orzhov Belcher player, and this is a deck to beat right now. I was talking about it when I was doing my deck tech for Mardu Energy. I said that's part of the reason why we're playing all of that main deck discard, part of the reason we're on 4 Thoughtseize, part of the reason we're on 4 Deafening Silence, the reason we're on Disruptor Flute is this deck. I think this deck is very good. I think this is a top 4 deck in the format right now. Like the top 4 decks are right now Energy, blue-black base tempo, and show and tell. You could have predicted that, but the fourth one along with them is this. And, I don't know how I would rate those decks. They all have their different strengths and weaknesses, but I think this is a very legit deck right now. And this is a deck that can beat you up, especially if you're playing Energy without the proper ways to interact with it. This deck is all in Degeneracy. It is new, that showed up in like the last 2 months or so. Got invented on our wonderful Discord server. This deck was actually, fun fact, this deck was my idea. I don't take sole credit for anything. This was a random idea I had after I played a random guy on ladder and had something with the Char Belcher in it. And I said, yeah, what if we did Sacrifice Belcher? And it's funny because like the opposite thing that usually happens. Usually like somebody posts a random idea in my Discord and then like me and some other players will like really cook on it and tune it for the meta. But like the opposite thing happened here where I had a random idea and then forgot about it. And then a couple of guys, mostly Tommy, worked on it a lot and tuned it into like a really nasty meta deck. The thing is, I don't like playing this deck because I personally don't like unfair decks that kind of feel slot machine. Like I would much rather play something else. But this deck is really, really, really strong. People have been putting up great results with it. It has the potential to turn one. It does some absolutely nasty stuff. It has a crazy amount of fast mana between the Dark Ritual and the Sacrifice, so you are almost always going to be sticking a turn 1 Necro, or a turn 1 Sorin into Elenda who is not rendering, or a turn 1 Charbelcher. And it is some absolutely messed up stuff. The deck has multiple ways to win. It has multiple ways to just refill its hand. It's kind of crazy how it's built right now. Saint Elenda won't look here either. Okay, this says you win the game if this creature enters the battlefield against energy. It sucks. But yeah, I think this deck is really, really strong. I'm not an expert on it because, like I said, I don't play it because this is not my favorite kind of deck. This is the kind of deck I tend away from, personally. But there's some cool stuff. What's Unstoppable Slasher? Oh, it's that new one. I have not played with this card. But yeah, typical sideboard stuff. Defensive spells, graveyard hate, discard. You name it, you got it. I think this is a deck that will show up a lot in the metagame challenge, which is why I'm gonna, keep showcasing it like this. I think this is a real deck. I think you got to be prepared for it. I think you need to be able to interact with your opponent on turn 1. You got to keep this in mind when you build your deck. It sucks because it is a constraint on deck building. I do think the format is very, very healthy, as you see by the diversity in this tournament and the cool new decks that I haven't even gone over yet. There's a lot of diversity here, so the format's super healthy, but you do have to respect these really busted decks. You have to respect the Belcher decks, and you have to respect the Show and Tell decks. And you have to respect the deck that plays both that won the tournament. New decks, new decks, new decks. Got some new stuff. Let me put this on screen really quick. This. Oh no, none of it's gonna render. Aww. Website's ruining my plans. All right, that's fine. So this is a Grixis control shell that is playing really cool cards. So if we go to Sparkle, and Phantasmal, Shield back. Oh. Side by side, me please. Okay, we'll call that good. Oh no, that didn't work. Hold on. Okay, side by side won't work because I'm recording just my window. Right. Okay. So this is playing a lot of cool new cards. So this is a Grixis control shell otherwise, but we are playing these chorus cards here. And we're also playing Phantasmal Shieldback, which is just a really strong card with Flare of Denial. So we're playing specifically Hymn to the Ages, the Shanty, and the Ballad. Hymn to the Ages is a very, very, very strong card draw spell. It's similar to Accumulated Knowledge in a vacuum. The first cast is a 2-mana draw 1. That's not good, but a 2-mana draw 2 at instant speed is absolutely fantastic. And future casts only get better than that, right? So this is a card that hadn't caught on yet in Timeless, even though blue decks were very popular, and finally somebody cracked the code and they made a control deck that really leveraged this. The control deck also played Ravage Shanty as a removal spell. So at face value, this is at least a shock, but then it is a card that will continue to scale as the game goes on. So it's more akin to Galvanic Discharge than it is to shock. And it also scales up your Hymn to the Ages. And this particular deck also played one copy of the Mycelic Ballad. This is a really cool card to play because even though it's 4 mana, it is pretty much a board wipe. Like each player sacrifices X creatures, gains X life. Like nobody's really going to have more than 2 or 3 creatures in play in Timeless other than an energy player. So this is a board wipe against most decks. It's also an out to random things like Hullbreaker Horror and some other creatures, Saint Alenda, things that are like hard to remove after the unfair deck does its thing, which is super interesting. So they made a control deck, really, really well designed control deck, may I add, that leveraged that as a source of card advantage. So this played the obvious things like Tamiyo, Mana Drain, Fatal Push, Flare of Denial, as we saw. Another Flare of Denial card. All the interactive stuff, one copy of Treasure Cruise, and also this Fae of Wishes package that I gotta talk about. Look at this sideboard over here. Fae of Wishes can grab Jace to win the game. Fae of Wishes can grab one of Clear the Mind, or Fae of Wishes can grab any sideboard card to win the game. They also have an extra Mycelic Ballad, which is the black one right here. In the sideboard to go ahead and grab. Of course, they can sideboard like a normal person too, which they do. But it's really cool that Fae of Wishes can go ahead and grab a bunch of stuff. So I was talking on Discord to the guy who made the deck, because the guy who made the deck, Hirotsa, showed up in my Discord like the day before the tournament. Started talking about it. He did a great job with it. And if you ask him a question about the deck, he'll get back to you with a paragraph. Like, put a lot of thought into this deck. He said he's a hard control player at heart, so this sort of Fae of Wishes for random sideboard cards to win the game nonsense is something that he's very familiar with. And that's why he chose to build the Hymn to the Ages deck this way. After talking with a bunch of guys on Discord, we're pretty convinced that this Hymn to the Ages Rabid Shanty package is very strong and it could be leveraged in other decks. Like one of the things he was asked is why not Psychic Frog? Why no, chest hair style tempo deck? And the answer is just because his personal preference is that he wants to build a control deck because that's his deck building style, and that's how most people are. If you asked me, hey, could you build a deck, I don't know, like Thoughtseize in it, for example, make a new Thoughtseize deck, what would I do? I'd make a deck with proactive creatures and put the Thoughtseize in it to disrupt, same way like Mardu energy plays, right? You ask Chesthair to make the Thoughtseize deck, he would play his Psychic Frog and counterspells. He would use the Thoughtseize to get info to make his counterspells better, right? You give Thoughtseize to a combo player, they're going to make a combo deck and use the Thoughtseize to protect their combo. There's multiple ways to use cards. So his approach to using him was to use this card advantage to play control. However, you could use this card advantage to play combo or use it to play tempo. So there's a lot of people that are iterating on this and putting up new ideas. A lot of these ideas are probably going to show up at the Metagame Challenge. I think the versions that are using like the typical Dimir tempo creatures like Psychic Frog could be very good. I've also seen some people try to make like an Is It Underworld Breach version, which is really sick. So I'm really excited to see where this deck goes, how it evolves, because I know there's a lot of potential here. I know the deck can change. This control version can continue to be refined and other people can continue to make other chorus decks. So I'm super excited for that. 2 more really cool decks I want to go over. First, this one missed the playoffs, unfortunately, but I just want to show it off once. Look at this really cool Faithless Looting deck. I love stuff like this. So you know me, I love red decks. I love Blood Moon. I love Faithless Looting. So it warms my heart to see someone actually register a deck like this. They ended up going 2 and 3. My personal opinion, I don't think this exact deck construction will end up winning too many games in Timeless. I don't think this interacts properly with the unfair decks that I mentioned 100 times in this video that you have to respect. Like, this deck is playing like Fury as its main deck interaction, where I would rather play Grief, but this is a very heavy red deck, so you can't support Grief, so you'd have to play Thoughtseizes, and Thoughtseizes don't synergize with your strategy, right? So, kind of in an odd situation. All that they have for unfair matchup is like these 3 Thoughtseizes, 2 Baubles, a Flute. Like, it's not enough in my opinion. I think you're going to lose more games than you're going to win, but I love it. I love what I see. I think this is some really cool technology. Back a long time ago, I'd made like a bunch of versions of decks like this for Historic, and they were never quite good. Though I really just love playing with Faithless Looting Fiery Temper. And there's another card, it's Timeless Legal, but it's not good enough, Mana Gorger Phoenix. Oh, that's like my favorite little combo, with Faithless Looting Fiery Tempers, that stupid card. But I hadn't tried building a deck like this since they printed Detectives Phoenix and Fear of Missing Out, which are two fantastic enablers. Detectives Phoenix is a haste enabler for your big stupids, and Fear of Missing Out can get you extra combats to get the damage across. So if you make like a really big Flame Lady Adept, a really big Nethergoyf, or you haste something up with the Detectives Phoenix, you get 2 combats. Right, yeah. But yeah, there are some changes you could make to the deck to make it a little bit better. Like I said, I think you want to play more discard. I think you want to play Blood Moon. But I personally haven't worked on this. I'm not sure whether or not this actually has a future as a meta deck, but I wanted to give it a shout out because it was really cool. This though, this is an awesome deck. This is awesome. This is wild. Actually, let's get the bigger view that has the cards up a little bit bigger. We do have one missing card. This is a Hate Bear right here. Can I open you? We're going to read it instead of looking at it. It's a 3-mana 2/2 first strike lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, the next non-creature spell target opponent casts costs 2 more. I'm not sold on this necessarily being an amazing card, but it works in the deck. This is a mono-white land destruction taxes prison deck. Fucking love it. We're playing 4 Field of Ruins. We're playing all the sauce here. It's so cool, right? So this deck is trying to lock down its opponent. We're trying to do crazy things like play... Where's the One Ring? Can I just not see it? One Ring over here. And go ahead and infinitely either loop those One Rings by drawing into more One Rings, or by playing Essence Reliquary, this Modern Horizons card, and bouncing it every turn. So against a deck like Energy, how you win the game is you just like bounce a One Ring every turn, and you have protection every single turn for the rest of your life, and they can't touch you. And we have the typical mono-white ways to interact. This is an absolutely hellish deck. Absolutely hellish to try and beat if you're playing Mardu Energy. They're just going to loop the One Ring on you. They're going to Solitude you. They're going to temporarily lock down your board. They're going to blow up your 3-color mana base with White Orchid Phantom. This deck can do some crazy things, especially if you give them the opportunity to dirtle at all. Because like if this deck gets the opportunity to dirtle, you know what they're going to do? They're going to play White Orchid Phantom, blow up a land. They're going to play Temporary Lockdown, put their own Orchid Phantom under it. They're going to play Essence Reliquary, bounce the lockdown back to hand, and this enters the battlefield again, and then it triggers. I watched it happen. The deck can do this. It's some silly stuff, right? It does struggle a little bit more against unfair decks, unfortunately, right? Because we only have white interaction, so we can't interact on the stack with counter spells outside of these very like conditional things like Reprieve, not a permanent counter spell, and Mana Tithe over here. I hope you know how to read Japanese. There's your English. That's Chinese, isn't it? Cancel him. All right. So yeah, outside of very conditional counter spells, really can't interact on the stack, which is troublesome. So I worry that this deck is going to have some tough matchups. One of the few saving graces is that right now a lot of the unfair decks are very, very greedy on the mana. They're either playing Goblin Charbelcher and thus have no basics if you do start hitting them with the Field of Ruin, or that they're playing only one basic, right? A lot of the 3-color show and tell decks right now are just playing one basic. But that's something that can change. Like if this deck ends up getting a non-zero meta share, what's going to happen is the show and tell decks are just going to play 2 or 3 basics, and the show and tell deck then becomes a very, very tough matchup, right? One of the ways this can beat an unfair deck is by kind of stealing the game with the Field of Ruin activations and Ghost Quartering all of their lands away, and then maybe go ahead and grabbing a Crucible of Worlds out of the sideboard with Karn, because of course this deck has a Karn board. No prison deck is complete without a Karn board, right? But if those decks started playing more basics, it would be really troublesome for this deck to deal with. Good news is that Belcher decks can never play basics, so stay winning, Kings. I love this deck. Just like the other decks in the format, people have been working on this in the Discord server that I'll have a link to if you want to join. Because people have been very happy to iterate on this. Whether or not this will become a tier 1 meta deck, I doubt it, but I think this deck is really cool, and it's something fun you could play. Do I recommend you play it this weekend if you're looking for 7 wins? No. Do I recommend you play it on ladder if you want to have fun and like bully some poor energy player? Yeah, yes, please like cyberbully some guy on ladder. I did it this weekend. After the tournament, I'm like, wait, I gotta play this. I need to cyberbully somebody, and like I had a lot of fun cyberbullying people. Essence Reliquary is very fun. Very fun card to play with, very fun to dirtle with. Lots of little deck building decisions too help this deck out a lot. Like we actually have 3 copies of Witch Enchanter here. That's a lot more important than you think because not only is it a pitch target for Solitude, it's also a game one out to Show and Tell. So if your opponent casts Show and Tell, puts Omniscience or Belcher into play, you can go ahead and put the Witch Enchanter into play and destroy the Omniscience or the Belcher, hopefully before they get to properly use it. So the deck is really well put together. Monumental Henge as well is another like card that really makes this deck click. Oftentimes you have extra mana and you have nothing to do because both you and your opponent are kind of doing nothing because you're prison, you prevented them from doing anything, but you're out of gas. So this card lets you just dig really deep, find your 1-rings, and eventually win the game. Lots of hits for Monumental Henge here. Hits any historic, so it'll hit Essence Reliquary, it'll hit the 1-ring, it'll hit Nykthos, it'll hit your removal spell over here, it'll hit your bounce card over here. Really well constructed deck. Oh, right. Anything else that I wanted to say? No, I think that's it for the recap. I'm going to... There's the main page. So here are the total wins. The finals one doesn't show up whenever I click on it, so you get to see everybody standing at the semifinals. Very fun tournament. I had so much fun playing in it. The meta seems to be like really healthy and diverse. There's a lot of pressure on the meta right now from unfair decks, so you do have to like respect some of those like turn 1 nut draws. But other than that, the deck is the meta is very, very healthy. As you can see, there's a lot of room for innovation. You just have to work really hard to find that innovation. So this was a great tournament. Hopefully we see a lot of these decks at the Metagame Challenge. Hopefully we get a cool surprise at the Metagame Challenge. We have a new deck come out of nowhere, like how Chorus Control absolutely showed up out of nowhere and surprised everyone. And I also hope that like archetypes like Chorus Control, Mono White, I hope they keep getting worked on because they're sincerely cool decks and I want to see a really souped up version of those decks take on a tournament and win it.